And I suppose if there's anything that we can do for each other is to create cultures of belonging, where people can be seen, where people can be heard, and we really give each other that opportunity for people to step into their full potential. And that's beautiful, and it's rare. And to the degree that we can all commit ourselves to creating that, even for one person, well, then we've given the world a great gift.
Aside from my soul. Welcome to the Inspired Evolution. And it is a treat. It's a communal treat. It's a connective treat. It is such a treat to have with us here today, inspiring our wanderlust, inspiring us into deeper levels of community, deeper levels of consciousness. Jeff Krasno, how are you there, brother?
All right, Amrit, nice to be with you. Thanks. Your audience will have to get used to balancing my relatively laborious monotone with your absolutely effusive inspiration. So we'll balance each other out well.
I think they're going to love the depth and the well with which you share your insights from, mate. I have no doubts about any of that. For those tuning into Jeff for the first time, guys, he co-founded Wanderlust, more recently founded Commune Media. If you haven't heard of Commune, I'd politely ask you, where have you been in the podcasting space? Why have you not listened to this podcast? It is one of my favorites. The guest speakers that feature on it are actually teachers within the Commune platform, teaching amazing things that are very forward thinking for what I believe the inspired evolution for tomorrow for all of us is actually calling in. So the platform is dedicated to online learning and personal and societal well-being, and we'll tune in today to Jeff's perspective on how those two things potentially are the two sides to the same coin. He's written books, Find Your True Fork, Wanderlust, Communion, and he hosts the Commune podcast itself. And the podcast is dedicated to the practices that actually help people come together to live healthy, purpose-filled lives, not too dissimilar to what's happening here at the Inspired Evolution on a glorious scale. Jeff, thank you so much for doing this, man. It is such a pleasure to have you.
Nice. Yeah, nice to be with you. And thanks for getting up so early in the morning and yet being so energized. It's an inspiration just in and of itself.
Yeah. What do they say? Hashtag worth it. So let's just take off right there. It's this perspective that you have, which is, that personal and societal health are two sides to the same coin. It seems there's many perspectives which people can come to that with, right? So on one hand, some may say, myself not included in that camp, but I will ask the question nonetheless. Some may say that isn't that a bit, I don't want to say self-indulgent, but a bit easy? Like, do you know what I'm like trying to I'll just focus on myself and surely I can just trust that that'll make society better. Can you answer that a little bit?
Yeah, it's a tricky question. And I think, well-being has certainly been portrayed and certainly commodified within the parentheses of the individual over the last 15 or 20 years, particularly. I look at the kind of efflorescence of yoga and mindfulness in the West. And it's generally, punctuated by kind of optimal performance or, anywhere kind of
peak performance.
On the spectrum from, six-pack abs to, optimal performance, et cetera. And those are very kind of individual goals. And, that seems to undermine some of the, principles of these modalities that are obviously millennia old. Yoga just itself, its Sanskrit definition or translation to mean union. So, and you can interpret that in a whole variety of different ways, but certainly, union with yourself, union with your higher spirit, union with nature, but certainly union with others. And in terms of meditation or mindfulness, particularly within the Buddhist context, the whole goal, to the degree that there is a goal to meditation, and we could talk about that, but is the realization of the non-self, that we actually live within a matrix, or what Buddha dubbed Indra's net, and a web, if you will, constantly expanding to infinity. At each juncture of that web is a crystalline diamond or water droplet that reflects all of the other droplets. And this idea of dependent origination or mutual interdependence seems also to be supported by modern physics, but is something that I think we tend to overlook in our hyper individualistic, societies that are often, where we often coronate these ideas of individual accomplishment. How much wealth do you have? What kind of car do you have? What kind of house do you have?
What job do you have?
What job do you have? What's the, your societal role? So, I think, when you commodify a practice and you bring it into that setting, a highly capitalistic, individualistic setting, it's very easy for that to, for well-being, essentially, to get co-opted into individualism. But I think that yes, there are people that are going deeper into their practices and finding the that substrate of connectivity or community or communion that underwrites a lot of these modalities. But I do think that there's also the application of some of these things to oneself does translate into societal health. So, for example, if you look at just physiological health, the health of the organism, to the degree that we can start to adopt behaviors and practices that prevent disease within our own organism and elongate health span, not just lifespan, but that actually has significant knock-on impacts in the world around us. First of all, we're not spending the last 20 years of our lives infirmed or taking a
hooked up to
cocktail
machines,
or with a cocktail of pharmaceuticals. We're not relying, and someone has to obviously pay for that. So if we keep going on the track right now in the United States, anyways, where we are with chronic disease, it'll essentially bankrupt the entire country. And we spend $4 trillion on sick care, for example, and almost no resources on subsidizing organic food or regenerative farming that would essentially have the impact of preventing disease, and instead of just treating the symptoms of disease. So, and then you think of all of the knock-on impacts as it pertains to family and community when people are sick. So, I think that, being able to adopt a lot of these behaviors, whether that's, adopting a meditation practice to lower stress and cortisol levels, or to increase the ability to thoughtfully respond instead of reactively, or be reactive, or, other kinds of behaviors as it pertains to food or community. These have massive impacts, both on a personal and a societal level. So, and then there's a little bit more of a kind of bespoke component to this, conversation where that has to do with sort of new fields of study that are just fascinating, like around sociogenomics, for example, like the relationship and the conversation that we're having right now as people absolutely completely present for each other in a conversation. Well, that is actually having kind of an epigenetic effect on each of us and on people, hopefully, that are listening and
Tuning in.
resonating, where essentially, their genes are being expressed in a particular way, such that the right kinds of proteins are transcribed and the right kind of neuromodulators are created, essentially to create, more healthy a more healthy environment.
We can't talk about this. This is the insidious part of what we do.
Yeah, right. Little do you know, we're upgrading your gene expression on this in this conversation.
It's the inspired evolution. We're here to help you commune.
Yeah. So I think it's kind of whether we like it or not, we're in the web.
Yeah.
We're mutually interconnected. There's no way around it. And so we're either going to get with that, and or we're going to try to isolate. But the more that we become isolated, and the more that we become alienated from each other, from ourselves, from our work, from nature, from any sense of spirit or divine, then we begin to look for inappropriate substitutes around us to address our unhappiness or our perceived deficiencies or our discontents. And that's what leads people to myriad forms of addiction. Once we start looking outside some of these tried and true forms of connection, we end up drinking or taking drugs or gambling or porn or sex or sugar or tech or whatever, any fill in the blank addiction that seems to all point upstream to a disconnectedness or alienation.
Do you feel, and obviously I've researched your work, so I kind of know, but leading question, that those exact points of disconnection that you're talking about is potentially what capitalism tries to capitalize on?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean,
can you tell us more about that? Because
you can't turn your head. At least, I live up in the canyon in Los Angeles, so I'm a little bit sheltered from it. But just 5 minutes down the road, you can't help but turn your head to see absolutely enormous images.
Billboards and
and whatnot. Of course, they're also popping up on every device.
There you scroll.
With the sole purpose of essentially convincing you that you are not enough, that you have some form of deficiency, and then marketing trinkets and bips and bobs and services and products to assuage that feeling of not enoughness. And so essentially, capitalism, for all of its wonders and all of its positives, and we can extol its virtues as well for bringing tremendous amount of people out of poverty, but it also plays on individualism. It plays on our worst instincts of essentially feeling like a separate self and judging oneself not through one's own eyes, but through the eyes of others, such that you become what you have or what you do or what you own or your role in society, etc. And really what it does is that it underwrites a loneliness that you have with yourself. And then, of course, what are your options? Well, you look around and you don't have to look around. It finds you. You're bombarded with the exact things that via artificial intelligence and algorithms that know where you feel like you're insufficient. It bombards you with these kinds of services, and of course you consume them, and it gives you sort of a momentary feeling of relief, but we don't love what we have. That's an issue. We're always loving something that seems to be glittering out there on the horizon. And and we can chase that thing in the pursuit of contentedness and serenity and happiness. But I will tell you from personal experience, the moment that we, cut open the box and remove the ribbon, there is another shiny object on the horizon. And off you go on the hedonic treadmill once again.
Hedonic hamster wheel. Yeah.
And the hedonic treadmill, it works on a renewable energy source. It never stops. And so, you can ask yourself, one way to sort of assuage or to address my pursuit of happiness is to continue to chase things that appear glittering on the horizon. The other way is to actually stop and reflect on loving what you already have. But that doesn't fit the growth equation
of capitalism.
Of capitalism. So, we have to find, I'm a capitalist, so I've certainly benefited from, some of the collateralisms of capitalism. But we get to a point where we just continually looking for external agents to be happy, and that's an endless treadmill, as we've discussed.
Yeah, there is not enough bandwidth that we can afford to what you just shared, which is love what we have, to love what we have. It's interesting because what's just sort of trickling around in the back of my head is your own journey with, having co-founded Wanderlust, and sort of the connotations that precipitate in the mind around Wanderlust is, going out there and exploring the world and seeing what's available. And then, now feeling into what you've created with, or, founded in Commune, and it seems much more inward facing, even though Wanderlust, for those tuning in that have experienced it, it's all about integrative modalities, right, that actually help you find deeper parts of yourself. So they're not too dissimilar. But even just in the titleology, I just made up a word, but even just the titling of the two things, I think do you reflect on your own journey in that a little bit, kind of going, the outwards coming back in and communing? Like, is there?
Yeah, certainly as I take inventory over the taxonomy, I suppose, of my own life. Wanderlust for me, there was a play in the word. Certainly there was the innate desire to travel, this kind of notion that we're curious and we want to go out and experience and see the world. And there's a lot of good reason for that. Obviously we want to understand culture. We want to understand other peoples and other languages and other traditions and rituals, and there's a lot to learn from each other in that regard. And so I think that there's a time and a place to travel and explore, but mostly there was a metaphor there, is that mirroring that external exploration was an internal journey, sort of in a curiosity for your own soul, and asking some of the seminal questions of, who am I and why am I here and what's my purpose, etc. And I think that the Wanderlust sort of encapsulated both sides of that journey. But as I kind of assess the world right now, and certainly try to get my arms around globalism, essentially all of the prescient issues, and whether they're globalism or climate crisis, etc. I have come to a place in my own life where I certainly appreciate the local and the communal, and the importance of knowing one's neighbor and knowing one's neighbor's neighbor, versus a kind of perpetual quest for followers that might exist 10,000 miles away. And you know, there's this wonderful verse of the Tao, um, the Tao Te Ching I'm speaking of. At the end, I think it's the 80th or the perhaps the last verse, 81st verse, maybe the 80th, where Lao Tzu talks about um, the perfect society. And the perfect society is a society that knows its neighbors, but never necessarily has to go there. I I encourage everyone to actually read the verse because it's gracefully and simply written with a profound wisdom that is so characteristic of that book. Um, and yeah, I mean, when I look at what technology and globalism have done kind of in tandem, they've created this very, very flat world with sort of spikes at the edges. So I heard, I can't remember where, but like maybe on Barry Weiss's podcast or something, where you can walk into an Airbnb and it could be in Boston, Berkeley, or Bengal, or any place with a B, anywhere really.
Yeah.
And see and find the same macrame wall hanging in the living room. And of course, this was just
Yeah.
sort of a silly metaphor to, just describe sort of the ever flattening of the world, where, all we have are kind of like huge media conglomerates, or all we have are cash crops, corn and soy and rice, but at the expense of all of the other vast, broad biodiversity that we could have, or all we have are humans, chickens, pigs, and cattle at the expense of all of the other species that we continue to lose every single day. So, when you start to look at, society, it becomes this kind of very, very, very flat kind of experience with kind of these spikes at the edges. And really, like, what we want, what we truly crave, is this kind of very bushy society, with this kind of society that, I mean, in a two-dimensional space looks like a bell curve, where you have a lot of distribution of wealth in the middle and not at the edges. You don't have a rich class of 0.001% with all of the money and this massive, and then a big flat line, and then this massive spike of disenfranchised people. No, you have a bell curve, you have a distribution. And when in this country, I mean, anyways, in the United States, well, we've lost, and this is a little bit cliche, I suppose, at this juncture, but we've lost is that vibrant, vivacious main street of our towns and cities, where you have like the local coffee shop and the local bakery and
the bustle, the vibe,
and the local jazz club and the local newspaper and everything. You have this kind of passion for these things because they're all of these kind of small businesses with people that are deeply connected to them. It's not Amazon and Walmart and whatever. But of course, we're so we love globalism because it gives us
next day
so
delivery
much stuff. There's so much cheap stuff. So it's like, when I to kind of go back to the original discussion topic, I do think, Wanderlust is interesting, going out and kind of exploring, conquering the world, if you will. It's a young person's game, if you will. But I do think that, what the world sort of very much needs right now is more community, more a greater communal sense, where it's like, where your food came from, and the farmer that grew it, and your local representative or select person or mayor, and you're invested in the issues that have the actual most impact on your life and your neighbors' lives. And we're so far away from that. All we can hear about and read about is Trump still in this country. It's like, Okay,
Yeah.
yeah. I get it. He running that article on Fox or CNN, maximizes clicks and it leverages human negativity bias and, for the
Mm.
sake of selling ads. I get the media model. I understand.
And the
But
motives,
it's like,
yeah.
and the motives behind it. But it's like we really just need to kind of again
Switching
rediscover
gear.
each other. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Rediscover each other. I love that. And so from there, I have to tune into, it's interesting actually hearing what the sentiment that was dropping in for me was, yeah, that there's this quote, and I'm probably going to butcher it in classic Amrit fashion, but I was smart, so I ventured to change the world, and then I became wise, and I ventured to change myself.
Yeah.
Yeah. So thank you for sharing that, and yeah, I definitely couldn't have you on today without asking what community really looks like and means to you, because and I'll actually rephrase this with a little bit because 5 years of podcasting, I've had a lot of touch wood interesting conversations, and Jeff, it's it's I don't want to say blindsided me, but that's probably the only word that really fits. It kind of it pops in every now and then out of nowhere, which is like you'll be talking about mental health issues, you'll be talking about global pandemics, you'll be talking about climate change issues, you'll be talking about behavioral science, psychology, soil health. You'll be talking about all these different things due to the nature of the Inspired Evolution podcast, right? Multifaceted, not too dissimilar to what Commune's up to, but also it just this echo of like community is an antidote keeps sort of like, and it's like if you're listening, you just hear it every now and then in the sentimentality of like, and it's every few episodes, it's like, yep, community, and I was like, what that problem over there about anxiety, community, that problem about depression, community, the problem about how we're treating the environment, community. And it's like, wait, like, what is this? Like, what are we that estranged? First of all, second of all, like, what is community? And I love the fact that you're here today with standing in commune with commune. What does community mean to you? And yeah, I know the conversation we're having is multifaceted because of potentially some of the background of what community has precipitated for me to be the antidote of. But I'm sure it's similar for you. But yeah, what does community mean to
Yeah, well, community is a central pillar of health,
you?
period. Um, and it interplays with the other pillars of health.
Mm.
So, one of the best indicators of your own metabolic health, for example, is who you're friends with.
Mm.
I mean, not only do you share their microbiome generally,
Mm.
um, and that's a whole discussion, but you
Yeah.
hold each other accountable. You have the same habits, you have the same, often the same kind of dietary proclivities.
Mhm.
So, um, so yeah, I mean, community plays a part in every single element of how you might define health, whether that's movement, nutrition, restoration, or purpose. So you can analyze all of those. I mean, central to purpose is
Mm.
community, is relationships.
Mhm.
Work is also central. And to some degree, your own personal suffering is central.
Mm.
Um, and that'll take us down a whole nother wormhole, but that was very much kind of along Viktor Frankl's thesis of what provides purpose in one's own life. um, but when you get into the absolute substrate
Mm.
that community provides within a society, you don't have to look far to see what are the concomitant impacts of it, or what the impacts of are when you have a disintegrating community.
Mm.
So in a community that's degrading, what you have is a lot of trauma.
Mhm.
So you have abuse, you have neglect, you have all sorts of forms of instances and events that induce a sense of trauma within the individual. particularly at a young age where connection is absolutely central to one's sense of well-being. And without that form of connection and in trauma, what we begin to do as individuals is disassociate. So we disassociate with ourselves, we become alienated from ourselves. And then what do? Well, we look outside ourselves once again to find that sense of connection. So the absence of community means drug abuse. It means overconsumption of anything. It means addiction of all sorts. So, you have, our Surgeon General in the United States, Vivek Murthy, who wrote a book about this. And he's like, the number one epidemic in the United States is loneliness. Because when we're lonely, these are the avenues that we have available to us. I mean, we just, the numbers came out again this year, or for 2021, there was over 100,000 overdose deaths from opioids in this country. Well, that is directly connected to community.
Yeah.
Or in this case, the disintegration of community, which has fostered a sense of alienation and loneliness. So, and then there's just the notion of cooperation that emerges from community. So when you're in real life community has a tremendous expansiveness or tolerance, I should say, for disagreement, for a multiplicity of opinions.
Yeah.
But of course, what we have right now is fake community. We have social media community, which fosters exactly the opposite.
The opposite. Yeah.
So when we're actually in communion with each other, it's very difficult to hate. Yeah. It's very difficult to stand at the extreme. So community tends to moderate. It tends to foster compromise and garner or bring about a sense of cooperation and disagreement without being disagreeable. And we've never accomplished anything as a species without cooperation. In fact, it's every important thing we've ever done as a species is predicated on this ability to cooperate flexibly at scale.
At scale, yeah.
And this is what community, provides. I mean, when we are within a communal setting, there is at least an intersubjective understanding for what is true. So, of course, this is a huge issue right now because, all in the world of like alternative facts.
Yeah.
When we've had kind of this sort of disintegration of any sort of notion of intersubjective truth or fact or things that we can agree on. Well, how can one establish cooperation within that environment? I mean, you can't. So, and the tricky part of all of this is that, the means that we have at our disposal are the means that got us into this mess. And so, so much of commune and not just commune, I will say, is in many ways rediscovering many of these practices and modalities and ways of living that are old and that are true.
Yeah. Because they've stood the test of time in many ways. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, if we look at, what we sometimes portray as, newfangled ideas, yoga, meditation, community, or even like certain diets that get called
Yeah.
like paleo or whatever. But just even notions of like regenerative farming or organic food. I mean,
Mm.
the fact that we've had to rename them again is sort of hilarious, because
Yeah.
these are the way that the things naturally
Natural
are.
order. Natural order.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that that's actually it, is actually becoming attuned
Mm.
to the course of nature.
Hmm.
And that, of course, is what the Tao is
Hmm.
skillfully imbuing or stepping into the river of nature and being able to sort of skillfully apply the rudder. Um,
Yeah,
yeah.
I was going to ask you because I find this in my own life, looking inwards, that oftentimes I don't know what my edges are until I've swung the pendulum too far out and hit an edge and then gone, oh, unhealthy,
Mm,
and then it'll
yeah.
swing back in and then it's like, oh, okay. And then sometimes it swings on both ends till I finally find a little bit more equilibrium.
Yeah.
Would you, and doesn't have to be yes or no, I'm just curious to sort of feel into your perspective on this. Would you feel like society's doing a bit of that pendulum swinging at the moment? Like, are we pretty far out? And would you ascribe that sort of behavior potentially to what's going on? Like, because I
Mm.
agree with you, it feels like we're out at some really drastic edges here.
Yeah, I'm not sure I would use the image of the pendulum per
Yeah.
se. I would might be use the image of a fraying shoelace. Have you ever had one
Mm,
where you pull the ends of it and it's
oof.
like
Yeah.
the middle gets precariously
Yeah.
thread-like.
Yeah.
And so I would say, yes, we are headed, with full acceleration towards the thinnest edges of the branches, if you will.
Mm,
That we are becoming a society of extremes.
mm,
Um, and again, that kind of speaks to that image of the flat world, with
mhm.
the spikes at the edges.
Yeah.
Um, and um, and there's very, very little middle ground. There's very little, middle way, if you will.
Yeah.
And this is a very dangerous predicament, um, because while and there's some kind of like Newtonian physics to
Mm,
it. It's like one action begets an equal and opposite reaction.
mhm.
Well, you know, abolish the police, that in this country, not to get overly political, but
Mm,
like, you know, that sort of extreme position on one side, well, that would only beget sort of like replacement theory on the other side, and
mm,
push out and out and out and out and out and out and out.
mm,
And this is kind of unfortunately the invective um, that we seem to be mired in at the moment, versus a more like, as a natural part of life, there will be opposites.
mm,
I mean, the emergence or the arising of opposites, of
mhm,
course, the Chinese built many philosophies around this,
mhm,
um, but is a natural course of nature,
mhm,
you know. But but in the natural world, there's an underlying foundational intelligence that
synergy.
manages
Yeah.
that manages to bring opposites
Mm,
into an asymmetrical, very sensitive order. It's
mm,
never perfect,
mhm,
but uh, but there is but nature and in its wisdom is always pulling opposites towards a place of coherence, of tenuous balance.
mm,
But when you impede upon nature,
mm,
when you move against it, when you swim upstream, or when
mm,
you like what we've done, let's say, with how we approach energy,
mm,
um, you know, well you know then you've disrupted this natural flow, or this natural intelligence, um, that brings things into coherence. So you push things very, very far out to the edges. And I think that that's where we are now. Now, it's not the only time over the course of history that there's been kind of extremes. Certainly there have been plenty of other examples that one can point to. I just, there does seem to be very high stakes.
Yeah, the
At the moment.
consequences. The
Yeah.
consequences is, yeah.
I mean, at least from an anthropocentric view of the world, the stakes are high.
Aren't they?
um, yeah. But I guess not just for mankind. I mean, also um, for species and
Yeah.
biodiversity in general. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting to feel into what the what the responsibility of the individual um can can pertain to, because it's the rub between almost like the collective sort of blind eyeingness that we witness at mass scale. And I found it really intriguing what you were sharing before about just the subtlety of how difficult it is to disagree with someone in person. It's like those conversations in face to face are tough conversations to have. But online, it's easy to throw the spear across the the keyboard. It's just like whack, and just like the turning of the blind eye when more and more of us is existing potentially in these digital spaces, rather than this integrated organic matter world, and where it's like, and I'm really precipitating for me at the moment in this conversation the escapism that online space really potentially is, from the groundedness and some of the issues that we have on a local global scale. The thoughts about what it is that potentially keeps us in this mass sort of aversion from what is calling us home to community, because I do notice that there are people soaking up. Commune obviously has a massive following online. There are more and more people that are recognizing the awareness of the important conversations that you're having and then integrating that back into their lives, into the day to day, into the 3D. So there is a soaking up, like I'm saying the word resurgence, but there are people that are awake to that conversation. But then there is still that sort of blind eyingness on a mass scale towards some of that. How do you reconcile those two? Do you think there is a reconciliation underfoot? Do you think more and more people are waking up to the pillar of health that is community?
Mm-hmm.
Is there hope? Is there optimism? Or is it, where do you find yourself in that conversation?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's always optimism. I mean,
Cool.
and I mean, the reality of what it's like to be me is
Mm,
optimistic, because the people, the angels that I wish to appear in my life are there, just
mm,
because by the nature of just kind of what I do. So I might have a skewed, almost vision of reality, just
mm,
because my community is very, very strong and full of just absolutely inspirational, brilliant people that I'm so fortunate to be with all the time.
mm,
So that keeps kind of me optimistic, um, but anytime I get out of my kind of solipsistic bubble, um, which is I try to do, because I need to connect with the human condition outside of just what my own subjective experiences of it.
mm,
It's like a big, mean, cold, wet slap in the face. um, and I do think people are really, really craving community and connectedness. And
mm,
so, yes, there, I absolutely see that. And I see that there is a method um, by which we can help to create and foster a greater sense of community. And I'm not a Luddite. I mean, I feel like we can leverage technology
mm,
in a very important way, but in a way that enables people within their local place. And that's always been my great dream, with Commune.
Yeah.
I'll kind of unpack that a tiny bit. Like
Please take your time and
John,
bring it to us.
yeah, John Maynard Keynes has this wonderful quote that I came across maybe year and a half ago. I'll probably kind of slightly butcher it, but I believe it's something along the lines of it's easier to ship recipes than cakes and biscuits. And in a
No.
way, I think that, Commune, at least my small part, my small
Mm,
contribution to the world, is being able to use digital infrastructure to ship recipes, not
mm,
cakes and biscuits.
yeah.
What we need to do is be able to ship the recipes such that there are more local bakers, if you will.
Yeah.
Um, and I look at models like TED and TEDx, or like AA, for example,
Yeah.
which have kind of centralized principles, but very kind of decentralized
Hubs.
um, hubs and decision making um, and power structures, etc., as good models for local community building
Mm,
around kind of centralized ideas.
hmm.
And so, we've built this community network on the Commune platform that has people that have people, in virtually every country around the world, and they have technology um, available to them to connect with other people that they can actually geolocate, within 5 or 10 miles.
Mm,
So if, my ultimate vision for this, of course, there's a lot of chopping of wood and carrying of water along the way, but is being able to, provide essentially the recipes,
mm,
very clear, modalities for health across nutrition and movement and restoration and community building and purpose work and social impact, etc. Provide those thought leaders that can deliver that information, then provide very clear kind of toolkits for social organization and community building,
mm,
and then decentralize that process such that people can create community around ideas, these salient impression ideas, um, on their own, in their own communities, where
mm,
they can create continuity and safe space and vibrant decentralized organizations, etc. And that can start very simply of like, oh yeah, here's a bit about um, healthy metabolism. Now you, somewhere across the world, can organize someone, a small group in your local yoga studio and local church or wherever, and have a
mm,
discussion around
mm,
these ideas that can then kind of proliferate within smaller communities. So these ideas of small circles, I think there are many out there, and I see it as a very, very powerful mechanism for change. And certainly, as Commune grows, I'll be able to focus more of my time in that direction.
fostering that. Yeah, I love that. And I would love to hear the insights. Is the community building toolkit something that's precipitating over time, or is it something that is something that is there? Like,
Yeah,
what are
yeah,
your
we've
plans?
used this off-the-shelf platform called Mighty Networks. There's a woman named Gina Bianchini that built essentially a um, a platform for community called
Mm,
Mighty Networks,
yep.
that's sort of a replacement in some ways for Facebook,
Yep.
without the algorithms and ads,
Mm,
etc. And we've used that to some great effect, in terms of wiring our own community around, with people
mm,
with shared passions and interests and whatnot. So that's kind of how we're leveraging that particular platform,
hmm.
is kind of in service of this vision to build this kind of decentralized community model around centralized, or fluency around centralized ideas.
Hmm.
um, and yeah, so that's thus far
Mm,
at least the tool that I've been using. And there's,
yeah.
I mean, they've done a great job um, building out all sorts of facets of that tool. So
Mm. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, as you're sharing the Inspired Evolution podcast, part of what it was birthed out of was every alternate Friday, I would have people come over to my home. And it's interesting, actually, in this conversation, a lot of it's very poignant. Community. I actually gave up alcohol. It's interesting, just I can really feel in this conversation that reconnection to self and the disconnection and sort of the alienation and the external. Like, it's never really been that. Like, I was aware that I made a shift, but I wasn't aware of the connection piece in that shift. It's only precipitating in this conversation thanks to the space that we're holding here. Thank you. Yeah, the disconnection. So I disconnected from alcohol, and then but I still wanted to socialize. And Friday night drinks was this thing that I was just it was my favorite kind of hobby on the And so
Right.
every alternate Friday, I decided I was just going to brew a pot of chai, and I didn't think about this too much. It was just Indian, so I was like, chai would be great. But then chai actually was the perfect recipe to attract the exact kind of people that I wanted, which I didn't
Right.
even realize, right? And every fortnight, I would just brew chai, and the premise was chai chats and community, and we would just sit in a
Mm.
circle. The only real rule was we'd all sit on the same level. Like there was no really like up, down, like try if you can, let's all just sit on like in my living room, just scattered everywhere, but just in a circle if we could, and just share, and yeah, for the life of me, when I first, it was kind of daunting, thinking about inviting people to my home, but I had this moment of inspiration. I was like, I'm just do it and just, you know, and the first one there was two people, the next one there was one person, and it sort of grew, and there was like 20, 25 people every fortnight
Mm.
sort of rocking up to my home just to shoot the shit on philosophy, spirituality, what it means to be a good human, a good citizen,
Mm.
and
Nice.
it was really intriguing to sort of see. And that was actually the birthplace of the podcast where people were coming over and they're like, these conversations are great, but I want to get them out further. And
Mm.
it was like, okay, sure. It was like
Yeah.
eventually the
Now you send the
podcast began.
recipes.
Yeah, well, this
You're
is
making the cakes and biscuits
yeah.
every 2 weeks, and then sharing the recipe, which
Well,
is
it's
that's it.
yeah, it's
Yeah.
fascinating to feel into what it can do for us because, and it's very poignant because that is actually the space that gave birth to the podcast, which gave birth to the space within me to make drastic career shifts in my life.
Mm.
Um, and yeah, like I'm aware of that transition, but in this conversation, like I'm trying to, speak to the poignancy of how it's all really landing in and just the depth of which community can really transform through the power of leveraging our relationships, really. And I think what I'm hearing is the like we are wired for human connection, right? Like we really are. And it's almost like leveraging relationships to create those shifts and transformations for our purpose, for our career, for our work, for our society, for our planet.
Yeah, I think part of it is getting clear on what is real and what is an abstraction.
Mm,
So, we all just want to be loved, right?
mm,
Anyone would say that. I mean,
mhm,
with the exception of some small group. But so how do we pursue that love? Well, we become very kind of connected to some forms of abstraction that are then we think somehow are going to get us there.
mm,
Oh, well, I'll make enough money so I'll be able to, have enough of a nice house so then, someone will love me and I'll be able to start my family or whatever it happens to be. Um, or, that, we want to be happy. So what do? Well, we kind of chase this abstraction in order to kind of come back here to,
mm,
what might already just be right at our disposal, hidden in plain sight. So we want to be loved. We want that connection. So, I mean, what you've done is sort of cut through the abstraction, cut through the fray, and just invited a bunch of people over to your house. And then you've had it, there it is.
mm,
Um, and, and so in some ways, you know, and this is where meditation can be so helpful, because meditation is really a process in discovering what is real and what is an abstraction, what is this veil that sits on top of what is real. And so I think this is like, obviously it's just such a personal quest and challenge for every individual, but the degree to which you can kind of eschew all of those externalities and just go right to the thing that is most real. There's a tremendous amount of fulfillment in that. It's hard to live that way all the time. And so then, this is the challenge, is, we meditate in the quest of discovering what is real. And then, the byproduct of that experience or that commitment, that practice, is that, your life becomes punctuated with these moments that are real. And the more that happens, the more real your life gets, to the point where, like, all of a sudden you've shed all of those skins of, all those cloaks of identity and everything, and you're just 100% there. But this is the great U-turn one must make in one's life, it's like, and sort of the unknowing process. But I'm similar to you, in so far that I have a location for commune up in Topanga. So it's this kind of sprawling 10-acre property that used to be Neil Young's place back in the 70s, or at least that's the folklore behind it. And
that's the draw card.
And every weekend, we have 30 or 40 people that commune there, around some form of modality or teaching or teacher. It's the source of an immense amount of gratification for me, is to be able to have, the scale of a global audience. It's lovely, and you get a lot of wonderful feedback from that. But to be able then to go in and connect on a regular basis with people that are all having an experience, and to live in that sonder for a moment is a beautiful thing.
And even just the poetry of just having, like, how good it is for our neurology to have dirt beneath our fingernails. When you start feeling into just like, it's what's real. It's like you're meant to have dirt beneath your fingernails. It's just like that simple. Sometimes the metaphors, and they're just like staring us right in the eyes. Yeah, Jeff.
Yeah.
You definitely carry a belief for a better tomorrow. I've heard you talk about the new enlightenment that is coming through for us. Like it's for me, and I don't want to sound rude, but it's extolling the values of virtuous living, and like real, and you mentioned this before, like the resurgence of, these things that have tried and tested through time. Bringing us back to a lot of these virtues, and I think the central one being community. A better tomorrow, what do you see as the potential for, well, I want to say commune, but community, the world, like as a community, as a global community, what do you, like, I know that you said it is peppered with heavily in optimism, and whether our biases play into that or not, what do you see for tomorrow? What is your version of an inspired evolution?
Yeah, for me, I mean, to go back to your pendulum image, I think that we have swung to a place of of kind of hyper individualism. And I think that there is a much needed swing back to a sense of collectivism. And I don't mean collectivism in the sort of communistic economic theory sort of way. I mean a sense of feeling part of something greater. And, that has all sorts of implications. I mean, as a citizen, it means something as simple as paying your own share such that someone you don't know can get a proper education. I mean, that is its own definition of nationalism, actually. Nationalism doesn't have to be this kind of xenophobic, hyper-patriotic thing. Nationalism can be, I'm going to do my little share so someone else can have an opportunity. I mean, that's a society to thrive for, to strive for. I think that there's also just in some of our systems and structures, ways that we can reorganize towards collective benefit instead of just individual treatment. So, for example, even if you look in like healthcare, we have been so focused on this, on treating the symptoms of disease in an individual. So we will spend endless amounts of research money and endless amounts of kind of insurance coverage on providing someone with like this new cancer therapy called CAR T, which is just absolutely fascinating, or, multiple like quadruple bypass surgery for cardiovascular disease. And these are treatments that are hundreds upon hundreds of thousands of dollars, but they're all geared towards the individual. They're all geared towards, well, you got it now, if you can afford it, well, we'll take care of it, instead of an approach to broad collective health, broad collective well-being, where we actually take a step back and say, what is the society that we want to live in? Do we want a society that's riddled with disease, and then we spend all of our time and all of our resources and all of our technology addressing the disease? Or do we want a society that doesn't have disease? And you can step behind so many of these questions. I mean, right now in our country here in the United States, there is a tremendous debate going on around abortion. As you may have heard, it's probably all over the international press. Our Supreme Court is about to go, backwards, 50 years, and that's created a lot of justifiable furor. But, again, the question might be, well, what could we do to create a society that would have less need for abortion? Well, one with less abuse, one with less neglect, one with less
more choice,
trauma, so, like one with less loneliness, one with less addiction, one with less drugs, one with less alcohol, what, we need to move upstream. And examine the root causes of our pathologies. And, that is a functional medicine metaphor, but we need to do that, across every facet of our lives, in a way that gives primacy to the collective and not just the individual. I mean, in our country, and we have the Declaration of Independence, which is like our, this mythological founding document, that this is, every country has, of course, their story. And, for us, we've seemed to equate this notion of the pursuit of happiness with the individual, with personal ownership, with what sits behind my white picket fence, you know? And that is a there's a great delusion um, associated with that as a path to real happiness. What we really need to do is tear down all the picket fences, really, um, and step into a greater vision of ourselves as part of a mutually interdependent world and society. And that's really what commune is trying to do in its own way. And we spent a tremendous amount of time and effort trying to foster difficult conversation.
Yeah.
We started this little project called Make America Purple. And so, of course, here in the United States, we have our Democratic Party, which is associated with blue, and the Republican Party, which is associated with red.
Yeah.
And as we've talked about, both entities seem to be careening towards the edge of their collective cliffs. And so we're like, okay, well, is there a way to foster more direct conversation instead of just leaving each group to fester in their own echo chambers? So we built this very, very simple interface that says, hey, if you identify as liberal, enter your name here, or if you identify as conservative, enter your name here. And all we do is we pair them up with a Zoom link to foster to chat. And then we do a survey and we say, how did that go?
Yeah.
And it's just amazing. I mean, at the end of the day, very few people actually discuss the political issues that got them into it in the first place.
Yeah, right.
They're like, oh yeah, my uncle lives in Michigan too, and then all of a sudden all of this
the real human connection stuff starts to effervescently just like
totally yeah. That's all it is.
Yeah.
I mean, I did that. It kind of built out of what I was doing on my own, where kind of over the summer of 2020, which was a very fraught moment here in the United States. I started, I was writing and I still do, I write a Sunday column that has a fairly significant distribution. And I mean, anytime you put something out to a lot of people every Sunday, you're bound to get people that disagree with a turn of phrase, here or there, some quite vehemently. So I started inviting those people that were highly critical of me to have personal Zoom conversations with me on Monday and Tuesday afternoons. And I did that kind of over the course of an entire summer. That summer, I dedicated about 4 or 5 hours a week to having conversations with people that disagreed with me explicitly on something. Just one-on-one conversations. And man, it was like an unbelievable experience for me, because in the end, I just, like, once I got on these calls with folks, I discovered that really in the end, people just want to be heard. They want to be seen, and they want to be able to share. And I built a whole little Rolodex of friends now that like they text me and they're like, and it's, it's very casual and sometimes profane. But very, very sweet, of like, people on the complete other side of the political spectrum, or, people of all kind of sexual orientations and colors and creeds and all this stuff, And now I built this kind of community because at the end of the day, we realized when we were one-on-one that we shared way more
than actually separated you. Man, you've cultivated that bushiness that you were talking about at the beginning. But I love that because it also extols it takes cultivation. It takes a minute to actually want to do something that isn't just, hey, check out my echo chamber, like it actually requires that I'm gonna spend 4 or 5 hours a week you disagree with me. Well, let's talk about it. And it's like, oh, I can't. We can't even get to that. It's like we're talking about stuff that we both enjoy. It's yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, no, it was an amazing experience for me. I
Mm.
mean, the first 45 minutes were generally dominated by the person coming on and just telling me their entire life story.
Yeah.
And I got better at it over time where, you'd just listen
Mm.
and you'd provide that space for someone to be seen.
Yeah.
And then I would just start to make notes around the things that we shared in common.
Mm.
And invariably there was like four or five things, oh yeah, I drove across country every summer too. Or like, oh
Yeah.
yeah, my dad grew up there too. And then, all of a sudden that would take you down these avenues.
Mm.
And of course, yeah, as you say, this is where we find, all this shared common humanity and
Mm.
real communion and real connection. Um,
Yeah. I was going to ask you, but I can feel I already know the answer to, you talked about trying to catch things upstream, and have you found community to be one of the most upstream ways of addressing things? But I also know that, of course, you did. It's called commune for a
mm,
reason. Um, I'd love to just being honoring in the time that I get to be blessed to share with you here is yeah, affording people the opportunity to be seen and heard is, you know, community does that in quite a naturally graceful way on many different scales. Even
mm,
just what you were sharing just then, being in community and allowing opposing views to be held, heard, and even just like you said, you got better over time. I've found podcasting to be an incredible gift. I wouldn't be half the coach I was if it wasn't for
mm,
podcasting. Just being able to sit here and learning to listen is, especially in a world that is consistently just bombarding output, to be one to sort of go, yeah, I will receive input. And how community also does that in its structures in many ways. You find your place, and it's almost like you're heard finally because you're accepted. Is like, this is who I always was meant to be. I remember one of the things that really, meant a lot to me. I remember I went to Brazil, lived on a mountain for some time, and there's this beautiful community of meditators that lived top of the mountain. And I always had this passion for drumming, but for the life of me, it was just music.
mm,
We've all got our edges around things, and I was in this process, and they could see within me that I loved the drum, even when it was just an inkling within me, and I kind of knew it, but wouldn't even. But they could see it,
mm.
and they fostered this, and they sort of encouraged me, and they allowed me to, they would play some beautiful music, and they allowed me to butcher their songs until I got it. And I was
Yeah.
like, keep going. And I was like, no, 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 I'm ruining. And they're like, keep going. It was this encouragement to sort of find yourself and find your place within the community. And I remember when I started to click with it, and it started to, the sentimentality in the space was like, he got it. And it wasn't even just my win, it was our win, and just what that meant for me to be received and seen and
Mm,
heard fully as my place within a tribe. It's
mm.
it's a
Yeah,
magical
beautiful.
gift. It's a magical
Yeah.
gift, Jeff.
Yeah, that's beautiful. It's a beautiful story. Thanks for sharing that. Yeah, I think, there is a delineation between fitting in and belonging. I think
Mm,
you described the features of belonging there, where you're embraced and accepted by a group in your own full authenticity, um, without having to change or alter who you are,
mm,
which would I suppose would be more of the definition of fitting in, of always feeling like you need to change or alter something about yourself uh, for the sake of connection. And I suppose if there's anything that we can do for each other is to create cultures of belonging, where people can be seen, where people can be heard, and we really give each other that opportunity for people to step into their full potential. And that's beautiful, and it's rare. And to the degree that we can all commit ourselves to creating that, even for one person, well, then we've given the world a great gift.
Jeff, I mean this sincerely and humbly with all my heart. You have given the world a great gift through Commune and the podcast as well. And those that are tuning in, please, I do invite you to check it out. If you're loving the Inspired Evolution podcast, you're going to love the Commune podcast. Definitely. And there's some amazing courses as well. Yeah, one of the ones I'm keen to check out is also the Protein Myth that recently came out with Zach Bush. We had Zach on the podcast. Awesome dude, really heart-centered, really down to earth, literally soil health. But yeah, the conversations you're having really do inspire my evolution. So I do invite the audience to check it out. And, with all my heart, thank you so much for what you're fostering and what you're creating and what you're holding space for in the world, Jeff. And I know it's not just today's conversation that we get to revel in, it's a lifetime's work that informs this. So thank you for your journey. And on behalf of the Inspired Evolution audience, myself and the tribe here, wishing you all the best on your journey.
Thank you. Yeah. Thanks for being here and doing what you're doing.
Hey guys, if you enjoyed this video, give it a like, leave us a comment. And if you want to stay in tune for new episodes launching every Monday, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video. Stay inspired to evolve.